How you going, guys? Peter Birch here. Welcome to another Talking Health Tech live stream session where we go live. It's a lunchtime live where we go live across LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook to talk about what's happening within the industry of technology and healthcare, and also to connect with a guest each week as well, and also to find out what's happening in our own Talking Health Tech community. So welcome. If you're watching live, drop a message in whichever chat you are in. A lot of people join via LinkedIn too, so hopefully you got a bit of a notification to say, hey, this is on. Apologies, there was a little bit of a confusion because there was a few different links flying around. LinkedIn changed how they do events between the time we originally promoted it until now. So if you've discovered this, welcome. You've kind of passed the first test live. If you're watching back the recording, drop a message anyway to let us know that you watched. As always, we're joined by our community manager. Firstly, I'll introduce being Aidan Cousins. Hey, Aidan, how you going?
Good, Pete. How are you going?
Very good. Looking very suave with your new do. And
thanks. I'd like to just shout out all the UNSW fourth years who are presenting their research projects that they completed this year over the past 3 days. There's been a lot of really interesting stuff come out, so it's nice to see that everyone's bringing forward the future of medicine, and really excited to chat with our guest today. It's going to be a really interesting one.
Yeah, look, we'll bring on our guest. It's none other than Emma Hossack from the MSIA, the Medical Software Industry Association. Hey, Emma, how you going?
Hi, I'm extremely well. I'm sorry I'm not sporting such a sharp haircut, Aidan, but yeah, I'll try and make up with
Love it. Look, many who would be watching this live or watching back the recording would be familiar with Emma, but for those that don't know Emma Hossack, did you want to give a bit of an introduction about yourself, please?
Oh, sure. So I am the CEO of the Medical Software Industry of Australia. I'm also a director on the Australian Digital Health Agency Board. And before that, I ran several IT health software companies and non-health software companies, as well as being a lawyer way back in the day. But my focus is fairly and squarely in the health software space now.
Love it.
Yeah. So do you want to give us a bit more information around what the MSIA is? Like, I have no idea what all these acronyms are in the medical space these days. It just seems to be new ones everywhere.
Yeah, so look, some people call it MSIA, Aidan, because it's so important, but it also has been called MISA. But what it actually is, the MSIA, the Medical Software Industry of Australia, was created over 20 years ago by a group of pioneers. A number of them are still members. Hats off to you if you're online, people like Vince McCauley and co. But they got together on the basis that, in actual fact, the Department of Human Services, as it was then, Services Australia now, were finding it increasingly difficult to deal with all the different companies. And I think they're probably kicking themselves now because we're quite noisy with them. But they actually did approach a number of our now members and said, look, can you guys get together and become a voice for all your members? And over the last couple of decades, that's what's happened. A rocky road, as with any startup, but essentially the Medical Software Industry of Australia has members who develop software that's used in a health context. Now, that doesn't mean it's all health related strictly. It might be financial. It could be lifestyle. A number of our members are things like social enterprises that help people who have got problems like homelessness and alcohol, drug issues. All of those things are all in our membership because they're all holding, collecting, managing information about human beings, which will ultimately be used to improve their health. That's the aim. Now, every one of our members, I think, together would probably hold about 95% plus of all of that information about all Australians. And that's quite extraordinary when you think of it compared to, for example, the banks, who everyone knows about the banks and the Big Four and all of that. They just hold cash. Now, cash is very important, of course, but what's more important? So I think the Medical Software Industry Association is probably a little bit of an unsung hero because it represents all of those companies and it's growing rapidly, I think 20% this year, who do generally improve the lives of all Australians. So it's been recognised through COVID, particularly how important technology is. And I guess it's our moment in the sun. The medical software industry has shown with all of its members' products how essential they are and what they can do really quickly to address something horrible like a pandemic.
Oh, so that's cool. So you're basically the queen of the MSIA, hey?
Well, that's a lovely thing to say. I'm just really a little minion. There's the board, so there's a terrific board which represents all the verticals, not all of them, but most of them. So we've got the president, Rob Best, who represents MIMS, which is used by many of our members. I think over 80 companies, enormous amount, and eHealth wise. Then you've got Lorraine Pye Finch, who's one of the directors and founders of Best Practice, one of the premium GP software companies. You've got Philip Lawyer, who represents Cerner. You've got Craig Port, the treasurer, who represents Civica. Then you've got Peter Birch, not sure about Peter Birch, but Peter Birch, who is also in his sometimes job, Meta Optima, use him for his expertise in all things health software, particularly with AI, I think. And so we've also got James Neville, he's a pharmacist and a great history in pharmacy products with his background with Fred and others. And Dina Scott, who's got a company, VMore, and have I missed anyone? That would be absolutely tragic if I had, because they're all...
No, that would be you got Dina in there. That's good. Yeah, that was
super important. And the vision for the MSIA, which has been endorsed by the members, bearing in mind the MSIA it's a membership organisation, so it's not a company where the biggest shareholder gets the biggest say. It's actually one vote for every company. So everything is ultimately, the strategic plan is agreed and endorsed, and then the board obviously directs me to carry that out as far as I'm able. So the vision for us is to create a vibrant healthcare system which recognises the value of technology in bringing those health outcomes. I mean, that's our vision. That's what we aim to do, and our goals then under that, which are it sounds all very kind of chevron going across them, what you do, but basically they are to ensure that our membership is engaged and all the stakeholders, and we deal with at least 85 stakeholders, probably more, but they're the ones that we deal with regularly, and they go from public, private, research orgs, not-for-profits, you name it. We would probably deal with them, and then we also have the goal, obviously, of ensuring that the policy settings for our industry are as good as possible amongst all the constraints, to enable all of our members to be successful, profitable, and do what they do best, rather than having to deal with a whole bunch of red tape and redo things that they've already done, or sit back and watch while money could be spent creating what they already have. And that's a terrible thing. And that's probably one of our strongest principles, to try and ensure that the software in Australia, which is so terrific, is actually leveraged as opposed to being reinvented when someone gets a great idea one day. So that's been what we've been doing pretty successfully over the last year. And if you kind of give me a question like Dorothy Dix, like, well, what have you done over the last year? I'd be delighted to answer it.
Yeah, so what have you been doing?
Just wanted to bring you in the conversation, Aidan.
Oh, no, you're just so interesting. We just let you talk, and then if we have any questions that pop up through, we'll just, shoot them through.
Get bored.
I did see PM mentioned live and fair call from his side, and on the back of the point around what banks hold. That's
yeah. Oh, look, I don't think, Pierre, you may have I mustn't have been clear, or you missed my nuance. The fact is that the banks are masters at data collection and AI. They're almost beyond our realm. They put enormous resources into it, and they do a superb job. And a number of our members actually are partially funded. Probably everyone's funded by a bank, aren't they, in a way, with their house and so on. But actually, some of our banks have got shares in the companies. So there's a lot of that cross-pollination. What I meant to say is that the data, the health data that we collect, and I thought I said it, is actually more important than dollars and cents, because ultimately try as you might, you can't take that with you, can you? All your big bank balance, you can't, load it up and take it with you. Your health is the most important thing that anyone has, and that's where we play, and the data that we collect in that area then informs the choices that everyone involved in a person's health, including them, can make to get the best bang for buck, as it were. That's what I meant, Pierre. Sorry, it wasn't clear.
No, it's good that you cleared that up. So should we be chasing all these data engineers that are working for the big banks to help our pipelines and data in the medical field?
Yes and no. I mean, there's, I suppose, a cliche around, which I'll deal with. The cliche is, God, the banks are fantastic. Why is it that the health industry can't be like a bank, right? And the banking system is incredibly complicated, no doubt about it, like the aviation system, all of those incredibly complex verticals like that go into make a safe journey or make sure that your bank is your money is protected in the bank. But where we differ is we don't deal in a currency that is agreed internationally just with simple conversions, all right? We have many different names for many different drugs for many different conditions, and they're evolving and they're changing. So that's number one, the language and the concepts you're dealing with. Number two, if the banks make a mistake, it's terrible, and you hear about it at the commission, and they do, send letters to dead people seeking cash and all of those things for services they haven't provided, and that's all bad stuff. But what would be worse is if the technical errors or normal procedures which are in place in our health system, which, let's just be honest for a moment, number one in outputs in the Commonwealth Fund company research, so not too bad, not too shabby, and number two in efficiency. But let's just say that that's where it ended. Like you followed the policy and you followed the software. There would be so many mishaps. It's because of the professionals who step in, because of the variances. Every single individual with any one of the diseases that have many, many, many permutations is not going to survive the system if people don't step in. So it's not an all or nothing kind of system, unlike the banking system, which you're dealing with hard and fast facts. Anyone who's a scientist online will say, well, or a coder, there is nothing in between the 0 and the 1, right? And that is actually where a lot happens in health. So in banking, it doesn't. It's this, like you've got this in your bank or you don't, that's what we're dealing with. It's a much more straightforward equation per se. And I know it's incredibly complicated underneath that, but ours is more complicated from the top down. And one of the issues that we have to deal with is the fact that because our health professionals and everyone giving care to everyone is so good at what they do and so motivated, and they've got such an important job to do, that they actually sometimes fill the gaps, and the gaps aren't recognised. And I think we've seen that play out with the Royal Commission until a couple of really bad things happen. When you actually look at them percentage-wise, which I'm not a big fan of doing that because each case is so important, but when you look at them percentage-wise, they're pretty small compared to the number of transactions. But that's the area where we play. We've got to make sure that the government or our members or our clients, the health providers and the consumers, don't just think, oh, cool, I've got this sorted, I've got an app, I've got the software, that's it. We actually exist in that space between the software and providing ultimate good health. And just a philosophical thought here, because, I don't want to talk too much about, collaboration and co-design and all of those things, which are absolutely great, but they've been talked about kind of like constantly for many years. So I think it's really useful to look at things sometimes in a philosophical context. And the one I was looking at was a concept called wabi-sabi. It's a Japanese concept. It's about kind of beauty in the space of, on the edge of nothingness, and about imperfection. And why I'm raising it is it's kind of the opposite of the modern project. That's the Martin Heidegger philosophy, where it's kind of science will solve all man's problems, all right? Whereas wabi-sabi says, well, science will solve some of the mankind's problems, but certainly not all, and only a subset of those. And it will say, the modern project would say, okay, then we as mankind, we have to find one universal solution to fix all problems. Whereas the wabi-sabi would say there is no universal solution. You've got to look for small solutions for particular instances and circumstances. And I think where we all fail, governments, departments, industry, is trying to be the one, the silver bullet. There is no silver bullet in healthcare. So we actually have to be more wabi-sabi than the modern project, if that makes sense. And I think that's really useful when you look at the products that our members create are sensational. And we can move into TGA here, because ultimately those products are used by really highly skilled and well-motivated people who will decide, stop that pop-up. No, that's not right, because I know that she didn't actually record that last drug, so I'm not going to give her the one you're suggesting, XYZ. Thousands and thousands of incredible, fast human responses to human condition. And our members, no matter how many smarts they do, ultimately we are in the hands of these people making those decisions, including consumers. You might say, yeah, you think I need to walk 10,000 steps a day. Well, I've just done a marathon, get lost, whatever it might be. So I think that that's really important for everyone to recognise. And fortunately, the TGA took that point with us this year. So a very hot topic has been software as a medical device for a long time. So I'll just kind of segue into that, because it's been a really interesting example of how the government and industry can work together, not always happily to begin with, but come to a really great result for Australia. So without telling everyone, because most people online would know, the Therapeutic Goods Administration obviously controls a lot of healthcare outputs. At the moment in particular, they've got, all the rapid antigen tests, all that kind of really cool stuff. But at, 2018, they raised, or before that, in fact, but it came to the top, the software as a medical device. What is your industry doing? What's the MSIA? What are those members doing? Should we be regulating that? Are there black boxes that are dangerous? All of those kind of questions were raised, and our membership got together, and in extraordinary numbers, the CEOs of dozens and dozens of companies got together and were regularly involved in meetings with 80 plus people, which the MSIA organised with the TGA, and through that discussion, education, sometimes really heated, but always really useful, educated information from our industry. The TGA, which acknowledged it wasn't a software expert, so it was treading into new and very challenging ground for it. So they listened to us and increased the number of principles in their guidelines from 3 to 4. And the fourth one was really critical for all members. Every single member of ours has benefited through this. And that was, if the software is being used by a trained health professional, then ultimately that's their decision. And if the software says do this or do that, the health professional will make that decision. And it's not for the software, and it's certainly not for the TGA to start dictating who should be doing what in that one-to-one situation, which is like no other in the world all the time. And they recognise that to their credit. So there was this didn't happen overnight. It wasn't one of those superb Pantene moments. Unfortunately, it went for 2 years of a very intense negotiation with all our membership, us and the TGA, together with great support from a few of our stakeholder pals for particular causes, the PGA, the RACGP, the AMA, and so on. They all supported this because they see that if there's excessive red tape, it's going to hold them back. Australia will end up not having the best software available to its providers, and it will add on to the cost. And who's ultimately going to wear that? It's going to be either the government or the providers. It's not going to be the consumers. So that was really successful for our members. All of the software that should have been carved out was carved out of that regulation. But it's an ongoing dialogue with the TGA in other areas, which we can go into.
So it's a really interesting area. Say I'm a startup founder, and I've got a software in the medical field, and I have to work out whether or not it's a software as a medical device. How do I go about learning what class I'm in? Do you have good text that we can read up on these fields, or is it just hope for the best, and if the people come knocking you, plausible deniability?
Yeah, always hope for the best. That's good. I think that's a really good approach to life, Aidan. But I would also, in addition to doing that, I would look very carefully at the schedule under the TGA, and you can see it. It's actually been replicated in the M Health consultation, which was just closed off on Monday. And I mention that because it shows how relevant and people are using it and taking notice of it. So if your startup software is exempted, that means doesn't even have to be advertised in the ARTG, the guide for that the TGA puts out. If it's exempted, then you can go forth and you know that you're okay if it's got those specific requirements. And we had every one of our members carefully check and give us information about what they thought should be exempted for solid reasons. For example, it was making a process which was previously in paper digital and useful. That kind of thing. No black box stuff where it gets black box and where it's kind of a needle going into your
algorithms that you don't know how they exactly work. And
that's and particularly where those IUB devices where it actually will go into your body and people will be depending on a black box. I mean that gets dangerous. So obviously that's not part of the exemptions or exclusions, I should say. So that would be a great start for anyone doing that. The second thing is to probably go a little bit further and have a look at the MSIA submission, because that gives you the underlying philosophy and rationale. Because that, I think sometimes when you look at regulation and legislation, unless it's something you're trained to do, your eyes glaze over, understandably, and you may not even understand it after reading it 20 times. So it's really important to understand the foundation for that legislation and regulation.
Oh, fantastic.
And so what other, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
I was going to say, like it's good to know that as a member of the MSIA, there's an industry body that's then pulling together the different perspectives and things, because it can be difficult from, like Aidan was saying, from a founder's perspective and trying to navigate all those bits and pieces. So there's a lot of work with the TGA and software as a medical device, but what are some of the other things that kind of fill up your calendar on a regular basis? So you mentioned there's many stakeholders that are engaged with via MSIA, like some of the ones, so that people who might not be a member of the MSIA might think, hey, I've been meaning to speak to the federal government about this, like it's like a more streamlined way.
Yeah, no, that's good. And it's a really good question, because like for example, this morning I was talking to two companies, both of them with, I think, outstanding products. They were people who aren't currently the member of MSIA, and they had solutions which I could see as being really foundational to what we need in Australia now. And I might just divert for one moment. What do we need now? Because it's really interesting when you look at the budget and what our members do and see the kind of correlations. So I think that the Secretary of Health would agree, when you look at the budget, that coming from the Department of Health, there were some really clear messages. COVID-19 response, which I think is, incidentally, we can move on to that, been extraordinarily successful for our membership, and now looking at the vaxxers, obviously for Australia too, compared to Israel and US and so on. But number one, COVID response. Number two, primary health care with aged care, telehealth, all of those really important subsets under that. Then we've got mental health, which is obviously almost aligned with COVID now. And then we've got sustainability and prevention. So those are the five kind of pillars of things that have been funded, I think, really sensibly. And I hope that that continues on. So if you were, for example, one of the people who I spoke to this morning, they're not all necessarily interested in software as a medical device. They might be interested in something about how do we make our software sustainable? Like, we know it's really cool. We know that it will have results because we've done a little pilot, all of the rest of it. But how can we make it sustainable? Well, I think one of the hugest feathers in the MSIA caps this year is the work that it's done really constructively on e-prescribing in relation to funding. So most people have an idea about how e-prescribing works, but in essence, it's a really terrific model because it involves prescription exchanges, any number, but there's two major ones at the moment. Then there's the prescribing software and the dispensing software, and then there's the consumer apps that also work in that area to make it easier for consumers. Now, what happens is that there's agreed funding through, I won't go into the actual payment where it comes from, but obviously comes from government, which bucket, all the rest of it, people will know if they're in this area, but it comes from a bucket in the government. It goes to the pharmacists, which then give that to the prescription exchanges that then share it with the ecosystem. And you're talking with the ecosystem, not just 2 or 3 companies. You're talking, I think, over 100 contracts are being managed by those prescription exchange services, a massive amount of other software companies, some of which they all compete against each other, let me say, but they all work really successfully in this project. And the reason it was so successful is, number one, there was great vision. The health minister funded it way back in 2018. Then there was work with the industry, co-designing with some of the stakeholder bodies like the college and so forth, Pharmacy Guild, PSA and all that bunch, and a little bit of consumer, but mainly it was kept really tight. And then industry just put their shoulder to the wheel. They got some funding, didn't obviously cover all the development, but they all did. And they worked hell for leather at getting conformance between all those systems so that the consumer, I don't know if you've had an electronic prescription, but it's unbelievably good compared to that old little green bit of paper that you inevitably lose. So the experience for the consumer is ultimately fantastic, a token on their phone. The pharmacists seem to love it because over 98% of them are linked up with it and using it, and they were not paid by the government to use it. Often the government has to actually really, gently force people to use software if they don't find it useful, they pay them. But that's short term. It's not sustainable. And then, of course, the prescribers were able to adopt it without enormous funding going, for example, to the PHNs to educate them, because it was so neat. It was just so neat. And so what happened is that everyone took this up, and in May last year, several months, probably a year ahead of when it was supposed to be delivered, Eprescribing took off. It took off in Melbourne, I think down in Lorna or Anglesey, and it just went on from there with now, I think, well over 20 million scripts have been dispensed using it, and it saved so many people who can't go to the doctor or the chemist in the meantime because they can get it all done remotely and then delivered to them. It's fantastic. And the government, of course, has got this transparency of scripts because ultimately, they are responsible for spending our money. So the department needs to know how to spend it best. And without transparency of that kind of data, it's really hard for them. So I think it's a real win-win. And you might say, well, yes, and what did you do? So the MSIA was incredibly supportive of the program, worked with the government, worked with industry, all the others. But then the funding looked like it was going to be cut down. And that was obviously going to create fear, doubt, uncertainty, both with the users, the GPs, the pharmacists and the consumers, because if it's not funded, it won't continue to be so good because it won't be patched, it won't be maintained, it won't innovate, it won't continue to get better and better. So that was obviously going to cause a problem at the end of the market. But in our industry, it was going to cause a huge issue because a number of people were saying, well, we cannot afford this. We can't afford to maintain staff to run this national infrastructure as effectively as it needs to be run, safely and efficiently and in a really cool UX way, unless we've got people doing that, and that takes funding. And if you take or reduce that funding, it's usually thin edge of the wedge. First it goes from 15 cents to 12 cents, and it goes to 12 cents to 9 cents, and so on. How the heck are the prescription exchanges that are managing all of this heavy lifting, which also is leveraged off for real-time prescription monitoring and a whole range of other safety projects, how are they going to do that? They're not. It's not going to work. But I think that the MSIA's kind of education of all the stakeholders and the department, they listened. They've put an RFI out so people can, they reinstated the existing funding that instead of reducing it, which was going to happen, and it didn't, which is super. And, there'll be a decision made sometime next year about where it finally falls. But everyone has had a chance now with an RFI to put in their reasons for that. Why would you want to upset a model that is actually costing, I think, less than 20 million a year? It works, people are using it, and you're not paying PHNs to make them use it, and it's providing health outcomes. And so the MSI has suggested a business case to show the kind of the risk benefit of this whole transaction model. And I would hope that the department listens to us on that, because it's such a successful project, arguably the most successful digital health program in Australia, combining all those parties. So that was a massive move forward, I think. And I think it's got to be said that a lot of that came about because the members throughout the pandemic and the MSIA on their behalf, where it was appropriate, have worked very closely with the department and very transparently. Mightn't always agree, but it's been done in a very respectful, useful way, because there's not time for a lot of grandstanding at the moment. There really isn't. So we just got down to, okay, this is what you need, this won't work, can we make this work, and so on. And so there was a lot of trust there with the department, and they didn't kind of take the view, well, your industry, you're making a lot of money, just wear it. Because it's actually not true, because 90% of our members aren't in that enviable position of being able to just go, heck, of course, funny. And so it was really, really pleasing to see that became part of the narrative, and they acknowledged that. And we're still working together on that project and how it ends up, but it's looking really positive. And I think that's probably the one biggest achievement, because no matter how great your education on these things, if you don't have a solid relationship of trust and transparency with your stakeholders, it's not going to work. It's kind of like the elephant and the rider. The rider's the logic, and the elephant's the emotion. Which is the bigger and the stronger? It's always going to be the emotion. That's the relationship side of it. And I think the MSIA has excelled with that this year.
Yeah. There's been a couple of questions in the chat that we should probably just make sure we're keeping across. And Pierre's put a couple of questions in, and questions about regulations in other parts of the world. But I might actually come to we can come back to that one. But Jonathan Clark has also put in the chat there about this ongoing, point around telehealth and Medicare. I'm not sure if this is coming much on your radar. If you've got any views on that one.
Yeah, look, we're about to begin our response to the 10-year primary care plan, the draft policy paper, which was released last Wednesday. So the MSIA will be responding to that. And one of the key points to make with regard to what Jonathan has rightly said is that the Medicare position on that is to try and ensure that the disadvantaged or marginalised communities, the homeless and the people who move around a lot generally, or don't like going to the doctor for whatever reason, or can't, or might go to one and then are embarrassed to go back to that one. All of those very human problems, they have made exceptions for those. I think that in the brave new world, where we've shown how effective generally the virtual consultations have been, and how efficient, that there really is room for movement there. But of course, there are other stronger forces to play. I don't think it's always just the department or the government. There are other stakeholders who, for example, on the clinician side, feel that, well, you think it's been more effective and efficient, but, getting back to the wabi-sabi, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And although it might look like Peter got the right script, if we'd seen him, we would have known by the colour of his fingernails that he was actually suffering gangrene. Are they clean, Pete? But, it's just that kind of...
I've got kids, it's unfair to say, but that's...
Yeah, I thought it would be.
Grotty
Get them out of bed, right. But in all seriousness, there's that kind of almost subconscious scan that any good health professional, and they all seem to do it, and they kind of then ask you a question. You say, I came to get a cough tablet. What are you talking about that for? Be it mental health or other. And they just have that. And it's a really good point. So it's not black and white, and it's a really hard one to make policy on when you're talking then. We've got to convert this human issue into a payment from Medicare, the big beast from Services Australia with 70,000 people. It's very complicated, but we do make that point, and it's not a black and white one again. It's in between the 0 and the 1. Yeah.
I think the argument about that kind of stuff is, as you kind of brought up there, like the whole accessibility to services that people, not only in like the Sydney area and the Brisbane area, but in regional and remote areas, have now got this huge access to doctors where they would never have been able to previously. And in areas where you have, significantly less doctors per patients, and where, the resources are really needed, this is a really welcomed, effort to try and give equitable healthcare and accessible healthcare to everyone who requires it. And then the second point to it then is, as you said as well, you walk around a lot and you change GPs, you might not be happy with one GP, so you go see another one. In these areas, it's like the whole accessibility side to medicine then is one of the most major aspects that changing this at the beginning of June next year will cause. And then on top of that, you can also have video health, scenarios where instead of just ringing them up on the phone, you will be able to see, show up your fingers in front of you, or you'll be able to see, the yellow fingers.
Yeah, look, absolutely, all of the above, and it was just great to see one of our members, Sylvia from CoView, on a slide for the I think it was interoperability or the next digital health strategy. Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I fell off my inbox, and I'm like, hey, it's Sylvia. Look at that.
Yeah. So that was really great. But back to your point more relevantly, equity and access. Look, we are really the only hope for that to be sustainable. We're struggling with getting GP numbers. I've been out. I used to, in my previous role, travel around WA in a little light plane. Not much bigger than me, to be honest. Just so there's 3 people, a tiny plane. Went to places like Walloona that you couldn't get to otherwise unless you had several weeks to drive there, middle of the desert, and yet all those guys, even ADSL2, that kind of stuff, like they don't even have the satellites going out there, they were able to access health care and experts in a way that was unprecedented. Promise never to use that word ever again, but it was extraordinary, and it was great to see, and that's only gotten stronger and stronger. And a number of our members actually deal in that space. I mean, there's obviously the Indigenous provider ones, like MMEX and Communicare and what have you, but there's also social enterprise companies that deal with marginalised people, like Info Exchange has the Ask Izzy app, where you're homeless and you haven't got a bed, and you go there to find out where the closest bed for the night might be. And that's really a whole part of what came out. In fact, I think it was today from the Consumer Health Forum about social prescribing. It's all, it's all connected up. If you don't have a bed and you're going to be lying under a bridge somewhere where you may get obviously attacked or be subject to the elements, all the rest of it, you're going to end up in hospital or worse very soon. So all of that whole continuum of our life, back to the connectedness of the wabi-sabi is really important. And we are, I think, representing that and reflecting that now in our industry. And the trick for us will be to make sure that is recognised, that we are integral to the healthcare. The healthcare is part of what we do. We're not kind of master servant with the payer, the user, all of that. We actually depend. It's kind of it's part of our DNA to have a provider going, hey, X company, great product, but can you think of doing this? You go, I hadn't thought of that. Of course, with COVID, we need X, Y, Z. And these companies have risen to the challenge. Every company was ready in March this year to upload to the Australian Immunisation Register. And if they weren't, some of our members very kindly developed or even offered for free their interface to allow them to do that, right? So you had eHealthWise with their product, and then you had another one, eClaiming Services, said, hey, MSI members, go ahead, go for it for a year. You can have it for free to get you over the hump, because you're all developing the adapter to web services. You're all super busy. You don't have to do it twice. That kind of collegiality and recognition that, you want to avoid the other cliche, we're all in this together, because kind of we're not, even if we should be. So it was really fantastic to see that, because that then makes the next step, the MSIA next task force on, say, primary healthcare, where there'll be at least 35 plus prescribing companies in that space, all of which are competitors. We need them all to work together to say, okay, what are the 3 big things that we really want to show would make a difference to the government, so that they can help set the framework for us to work optimally to achieve that. That's what we'll be doing. And without that kind of collegiality and trust, again, hopeless. So I'm really pleased that that's been developed.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a really nice community of companies all together at the moment, trying to go towards one goal.
Yeah, they're all going their own. Don't get me wrong, like they've all got their own agenda, all got their different goals, but ultimately it's that overarching vision, I think, that I said in the beginning, that vision to show that health technology is actually what is the enable for efficient, effective healthcare in what will be a really tight fiscal environment after there's a bit of a flush at the moment in health, because what government wouldn't put everything that they can into the healthcare budget right now. I mean, you have to. That's the number one for every Australian. And governments overseas, like I was talking to Canada yesterday, the guys there in charge of equivalent of our department and agency, and they're doing the same thing. But it's not going to go forever. So in that funding, we must make sure that as an industry, we don't squander this opportunity, this moment in the sun where everyone's going, that actually makes a huge difference, and make sure that whatever work we're doing, and I think we are, to keep on it, we are able to leverage out to other programs, be that in diagnostic imaging, in the clinical information system, adverse reporting, whatever area it might be. And there's about 15 other submissions that we'll be engaged with throughout the period from now to the end of the year. It's a very, very fertile time for industry to kind of be involved and have some big ideas and go for it and help the department and all of our customers make that happen.
Love it. Excellent. Hey, conscious of time, we've got about 20 minutes left on the live. We've got some good engagement there in the chat, whether you're watching on YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing there. Some good points around the importance of having clinicians on your team when you're working within the software space. It's important to have that view, and there's more comments about the primary care side of things, and there's more in there too. We might jump back to them a bit later, but as we do normally within our live streams, Emma, is we like to also check out what's happening within the industry, within our Talking Health Tech community. So we normally will bring it up here. I'm going to bring up my screen. Which one am I bringing up? This one here. So usually, for those that don't get it, we've got our weekly newsletter, which kind of summarizes a lot of things. You can subscribe to it on our website. We've got a Clubhouse session happening on Thursday. Do you use Clubhouse, Emma? Are you a big Clubhouse user? I got to.
No, I've got to get with it, I guess. Yeah.
It's just. Well, we're trialing different platforms. We're trialing different platforms. You're on a live stream now. I mean, that's pretty with it. But the other thing we're using more now, we've got a club on Clubhouse, which is an app for your phone. It's social audio, so you can't join on your computer. You join on your phone. You have an account, but then it's basically like someone described it, being flippant and saying that it's like Zoom with everyone with their cameras off. But it's supposed to be a bit more collaborative, and so we've got it's actually organised by Robert Burig and Ben McGid from Virtual Care and Cognium. They're using the Talking Health Tech Club that exists. We've got about 700, 800 members there now, and each week they host a session within it. And this one they're doing is all about ethics and artificial intelligence. We got Nick the Kelson Terry from Max Kelson. We got Stefan Herrera, who's been on the show recently from the Digital Health CRC, and also Pierre. I saw him in the chat too. He's jumping on to that session. Oh, he's participating in that session on Thursday as well with those other speakers. So do check that out if you're keen to come along. And we always take the opportunity to ask questions and get involved there. There's some good industry updates that are in there too. We've got our health tech glossary. I wanted to jump down to here actually. We've got 2 episodes of the podcast released this week, and one of the episodes this week was featuring Craig Simmons from Propel. Actually, I'm mildly organized, and we've got a little snippet from it here to kind of guide the rest of it. Hang on a tick, we'll play that now.
We found that the highest level of adherence from patients doing remote monitoring and using the iHealth devices, people over the age of 80. And so they use it more than anyone else. Then we go 60 above. The worst patient adherence was 40 and below. So I've always said the older people get technology and they'll always acceptance of it far greater than often the younger people because they're interested in their health. So age is not the barrier. I always say it's the attitude of people.
I like the quote about age isn't the barrier to adoption, but it's the attitude. I think generally that's a good approach to take, and it doesn't matter necessarily because often within the industry we can take the view that, whether it's a clinician or a patient or anybody isn't adopting my technology, so it must be because they're not the right demographic. That's not the key kind of. There's many more factors that play when it comes to that, whether it's the quality of the technology or the the need for a problem to be solved. But there's some really interesting stuff happening with the eye health guys and Propel, and an interesting episode. He was a lady shoe designer to start with, and kind of then evolved to he's a natural progression from where he was to where he is now. So check out that episode.
I really agree with that point around age not being a barrier. Like I had it, my girlfriend's great grandfather's 98, and he uses Facebook every day. He rings us. He can do his own Facebook lives. Like some of these people have been through so much, seeing technology start from horse and carriages to today they're walking around with a phone that they can FaceTime people over the other side of the world. Like some of these people really get technology. It's not a barrier as in that respect.
And I think what the whole COVID thing has demonstrated is if anybody, regardless of age or position, needs something, they'll find a way to do it, and they'll adopt something. But if the need isn't there, and if it's not a problem to be solved, it's just a fancy bit of kit, then it's not going to have interest of anyone, regardless of their age or demographic. And that's something we come back to quite often on, like with Talking Health Tech, it comes back to leading with the problem in mind, as opposed to just the fancy solution with more and more emerging tech and VR and AI, and they're all really cool. But if the solution is, if you're just looking to build some cool tech, it's not going to commercialize and solve any real problems. Just lastly, we're winding out some of our sessions from the Spring Summit. We featured Brian from MedRefer, MSIA members, and also Dr. Annie Banbury, who is from CoView, also members, and then some, of course, Ben, who I mentioned before, and Dr. Ian Kammerman from Northwest PHN. Yeah. And so that was a pretty cool conversation around the adoption of technology in rural health and what's needed there. We also come to, we've got the Talking Health Tech community for THT Plus members, where you've got access to the community forum as well as some other things. But in the community forum this week, what's been going on? Actually, Aidan, as our community manager, give us a bit of the high-level breeze past of what's been happening within the industry.
All right. Well, Klaus was kindly nice enough to suggest this new book that two doctors in Victoria and New South Wales have written called Hypocrisy. Our doctors are betraying their oath. And the idea around it is how some of the tests we use these days are not really clinically reliant anymore. Some of the surgeries that we may be doing aren't, evidence-based to actually solve the solution. They're just something that we've done previously, that we've always done, that now we start to realize that, hey, maybe this might not be the right thing to do for certain conditions. The example they use is the knee arthroscopy, where they go in with a little camera and have a little look around. It's been shown, to not be very effective anymore, and yet we still do it. So, Emma, it's a really interesting question. How do we stop technology becoming that as well in the future?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's, I suppose, just to segue from what Peter was saying before, in that discussion, it's really about usefulness, but also about funding. So I could say really follow the money. So unless there is an outcomes-based funding model, it's really difficult for these health professionals to, they're also small businesses or large businesses, but they're charging for their time. So it's a tough nut to crack, but I think that is probably what the primary health care 10-year plan is trying to do, because we need to have prevention and sustainability. Look, like with any industry, there probably are some outliers that monetize and game the system. It happens in every industry, and I don't think health is any different. But for most of those providers, they're trapped in a framework, Medicare item system or a private insurance claim system that actually may not be fit for the purpose of the particular patient and what needs to happen. And that's a very difficult place for them to be. Some of them then do, pro bono and all the rest of it. I know that, in my dad's day, everyone gave a day a week. He was a surgeon, but it doesn't happen now for many reasons. But the fact is that we really need to make sure that there's transparency, number one, of the kind of finding in the book. I've heard a lot about the research on the arthroscopy and talked to some clinicians about it. So it is real, and people almost kind of getting to the point where, oh gosh, I should go to the doctor and check to see if I might have this. I mean, that's an insane position to be in if you actually don't have any risk symptoms, etc. It's just kind of like a real third world problem, and in our health system now, we shouldn't abide by that. So having transparency, which our systems can do, but having a funding model, because without that, all the books like Hypocrisy can come out and show things which, you know, would be quite horrifying for people who aren't deeply involved with health to read about. But that will happen unless we actually fix the overarching structure. And that includes data management rules too. So the problems that, just extending it, that clinicians have with, can I share this? Oh God, the privacy, what's the privacy rule in Victoria at this time? Oh, am I sharing it with the Commonwealth? Oh, too hard, better not share. That kind of issue we need to solve. And I think, to be honest, that's come up this year with the work on the digital economy, which the MSIA is also inputting into, and things like e-signatures, all those kind of policies are cognizant of the existing framework being old, and not just kind of, it's, you know, nothing is perfect, so it's not like it's broken, it's still working, but we can make it so much better. And I think that there's so many, I think we've put in over 20 submissions this year, and there's still another probably 10, I think, to go. You know, that's pretty high in a COVID year. It just goes to show that there's actually a lot of thinking going on about, Christ, when this disaster's finished, how are we going to make this useful and sustainable health system that's 21st century? So I'm quite optimistic, because, you know, that book does highlight some good things, not having read it, but having read the kind of problem that it talks about.
Yeah, it's a really interesting problem, isn't it? Because the moment healthcare is set up to treat people who are sick, not treat people out of hospital who are before they get to the point where they need to be admitted. And that's what this book covers as well. Like back pain's brought up as well, where you have 80% of people over the age of 40 come in with back pain, and they're all going to have, you know, changes to their spine on x-rays, because that's just what, you know, all the doctors do. They have to check a x-ray, and then you go, wow, we've overdiagnosed this person with, you know, a nerve impingement that may or may not be clinically relevant. And they get sent off for surgery then, and that's an added cost onto them and the hospital that they're having to go through for these treatments.
And to all of us as taxpayers. So I think probably one of the most important things that we can do as an industry going forward is to get that data management framework and funding right. I think if we get that right, everything else basically cascades into its place, because if you get providers who have got the information they need, right form, where they need it, when they need it, consumers who likewise have that, who might want to make some good choices, go, oh, actually think I can do XYZ instead. That would be a better lifestyle choice, and so on. I think if we aim to do those two things, get the funding and that data management equation, which is privacy, security, interoperability, it's not trivial, but if we can keep working on that, as we have in really excellent steps with Eprescribing and other programs, which I've mentioned earlier, I think that we can get there. You know, it's not an urgent kind of problem that can be solved, unfortunately. No one overseas has solved it with a federated system, like we'll be hearing at our MSIA summit on the 3rd of November, where we've got Canada. Yeah. Well, Canada, UK, New Zealand, the States all talking about it. And no, but it's not. It's actually only open to members, so, and it's free for them. So it's not really. It's just a community service, Aidan. But they all have the same problem. They all have the same problem, and it's not like we're yonks behind. We're actually doing really well. And when something like the pandemic comes up, it actually shows how well we've done.
Yeah. So I know we're running out of time, but what's the first steps to get into a conversation on changing the payment system that we currently have in place for something as huge as, you know, outcomes in healthcare, and how we actually remunerate these doctors for their time? Like, does that start with you guys, or is it like a multidisciplinary?
Yeah, no, it really starts with the people who are being funded. So you've got to look at the end user. So it starts with Medicare, how that there's a few doctors online, and how that rewards. And it was set up with absolutely best intention. Things have changed over time. Transaction models are really useful in some cases, but not always. Sometimes it should be outcome based. But then outcome based can be very difficult as well, because if you don't, for example, always want to go to the same GP, how do you get that continuity? But then if we hit the other button and get greater interoperability, we start solving those problems. So I think that number one, we've got to work with our client base. That's the pharmacists, allied health, the general practitioners, specialists, the whole bunch, everyone. And I think there has been a lot of work going on, I think, with Professor Bruce Robinson on that whole MBS review. It's a tough one, because it involves payments to Australians in a way that they've had them for 20 years. And we've seen with the Mediscare scare before an election how it's very, very difficult to change things in that area. So it's going to be done very sensitively in a really kind of cohesive way, with not just technology. We're just one part of this problem, but with all of our stakeholders, and that's hard. But I do feel that the 10-year primary healthcare plan, which I've had a bit of exposure to, does recognise that. And it's always, although your submission might not be, you might get rung up and kind of have a call with the health minister about it. It's really valuable to put those submissions in, because it does make the advisors in the department, and ultimately they talk to the minister and all of those people, the finance department, about it. So that is key. It's not to be underrated. And I think that that's probably the first step. Showing that we can actually make it pay and actually make the experience better for the consumer. It's really all comes back to making sure that has been answered. Just making it better for industry or for the doctor, that won't cover it.
Yeah, just made some room, because there's a good comment, like good to close out the conversation, I guess, because we're coming up to full time. But Rob Best, president of the MSIA, has kind of summed up a few points there as well about, to be focused on for what's coming up in 22 and beyond. So look, Emma, some final thoughts. You mentioned we've got the summit for members, MSIA members coming up. What else is on your radar for what's happening in the next kind of 6, 12 and beyond?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that in the next 12 months, there's going to be reviews over privacy, security, interoperability, the National Digital Health Strategic Plan. I'm hoping, I suppose, if you could go, well, what would you actually want out of those? And what I would like to see is, well, number one, the continuation of the really useful and honest relationship that we have with the department and other stakeholders in issues that need to be addressed fast. So that continuing that kind of, without that, nothing will happen. Number two, I would like to really push hard on the digital economy side of things, where I think you've got Senator Jane Hume working to do all she can to deregulate appropriately, so that all of the information technology, not just in our sector, can be utilised, across banking, the whole gamut, as effectively as possible. And obviously, to enable that is that tough nut, the interoperability, of which the technology is only a small part, of course, going back to the wabi-sabi. We need everyone involved in that. And if I think in a couple of years, for her to say, hey, look, we've now got a data framework, we've got a payment model that reflects value to the consumer, the government, and the providers and industry, and hey, look, you can actually see what you need to see in any way you want. That would be a really good day. So that's the three big things for our industry, which a high level what we'll be concentrating on through about 27 little task forces underneath.
Love it.
That's fantastic.
Lots to focus on. So then, if there are any organisations who feel like they've got they would benefit from joining the MSIA, should they reach out?
Oh, absolutely. We would love to have a chat. If you are developing health software, I think it would be really difficult for you to do that without us, because we really do try and be the clearinghouse for a lot of really complicated information. And sometimes you'll quite simply miss out if you're not engaged. And I saw a comment before, every company should have a GP on board. Totally agree. The more GPs, the better. I think there's not enough GPs in Australia, and certainly having their engagement. Most companies do have a GP involved if they're in that area. They're either the founder, the developer, or on a board. But yeah, more GPs the better. To you, agree? And so, yeah, CEO at MSIA.com.au or membership at MSIA.com.au. Let us know if you think that you might benefit, and we would love to have you in our pretty collaborative and collegiate club.
Love it. No, look, Emma, really appreciate the time as always, and it's great. Thank you everyone who's attended live, and if you're watching back the recording, make sure you leave a comment and let us know what you liked, and if you have any questions, and maybe there's some discussion points for us to drill into for future sessions as well. So Emma, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks, guys.